We roll to the end of another week. We back at the same place. Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I'm really liking your current hairstyle, eh?
I'm not worried. I'm getting worried. Why are you liking my hairstyle and my beard?
It looks normal.
The compliments are coming fast and...
It looks normal.
Oh, really?
You look like a human being.
Okay, and previously?
But we've got much
Since
better...
we're exchanging compliments, I love your shirt. It's linen?
Yes.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, I didn't pick it out for myself.
Obviously.
But thank you. It's actually very
I'm feeling
comfortable.
generous, so yeah. It's lovely.
Thank
it's
you.
normal.
Thank you.
Maybe Rufaro will stop picking up the habits.
A few things from this. No,
Yeah.
I doubt it.
I mean, look at the ladies. They're lovely.
Yeah, I
Well,
was
welcome, ladies.
hoping
Dressed for
we
the
were going down
occasion.
the line with the compliments, and
Yeah,
we're
we're
going
waiting,
this way.
yeah.
We're waiting.
Yeah, I like your shoes, Shingi.
Thank you.
Oh, and the dress and just everything.
She's always on point.
And welcome, Rumbi.
Thank you.
So we've got among us two people that look much better than Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Rumbi and Shingi, who will be... Oh, and online we've got Dr. Chipo. Are you with us, Chipo?
Yeah, let me just.
Well, we can see her. But she's online. So hopefully the ladies will actually... Well, I know they know a lot more about what we're about to discuss today than these two bozos. So I'm looking forward to a very exciting discussion. Oh, there she is.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
Welcome, Chipo.
Thank you.
Chipo is joining us online from America. You are in the state of...
Massachusetts.
Yeah, and she is teaching there in a university where she teaches a thing called Africana. Tinashe and the producer...
I'm a political scientist, so I teach political science at the best historically women's college in the U.S., which has produced the likes of Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, and so many more amazing people. Sorry, I have to plug in the institution.
You'll be getting a
We'll
bill
send
from
you a small
Ranga.
bill, yeah.
Tinashe and Ranga had a little go at each other when we were preparing for the show on whether Africana is a word or not.
No, that wasn't the case.
What was the issue?
Well, it is actually. It comes out of the... you should never ask professors questions, but it does come out of the 70s, where there was a lot of discussion in the US on how to handle teaching about Africa, and when the teaching about Africa just meant continental Africa with 54 states, so it meant the Black diaspora, which includes Black Britain, Black Europe, the Caribbean, the US, the ways, African American departments, and some of them combined. So it's this Black diaspora space where we have political scientists, sociologists, STEM people, math people, econ people. So it's like all these cool people whose work focuses on the Black diaspora and Africa.
Wow. And I think you've just done an amazing introduction.
Yeah, you have.
Into today's subject and why you're joining us today. Shingi, would you like to talk briefly about what you do and...
Well, first of all, a pleasure and honor to meet Dr. Chipo. One of our clients, I'm pretty sure, if not now, in the future. But, so I'm with Access Forex, which is part of the Access Finance International Group. So essentially, as a group, what we do is we're in financial services, and we're involved in the movement of money in all its forms, for all its purposes, for all its reasons. And when it comes to this discussion, it's the remittances products that we're really interested in. So since 2018, 2019, we've been doing international remittances from the Diaspora into Zimbabwe, which, as you know, based on your title, reached 1.6 million.
Billion.
Billion.
With a B.
Billion with a B. Billion with a B. last year. So it's a massive inflow that's coming into Zim. But we also do local remittances as well. So it's not only money coming outside, it's money that's moving within Zim as well that we are seized with. So that's Access Forex.
Okay, so you're going to enlighten us on the money movement.
I'll try.
Well, and more importantly, Access Forex is actually sponsoring our show today.
You know, for a teetotaler, you are very good at acknowledging Umtingi.
Yeah, for a reason. For a reason. I'm actually surprised that you forget this, but for a reason. Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much. And please pass our gratitude.
Heartfelt.
Heartfelt.
They're watching now.
And shall we say tummy and tongue-felt gratitude to your colleagues.
Pleasure.
Rumbi, you're here because we had Rebecca Ziegler-Mano on the show a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she must have said to us no less than 5 times before and after the show that we must watch this documentary made by this brilliant young Zimbabwean called Rumbi Katedza about the diaspora, and we must do a show about it. So we actually went and watched the documentary, and yeah, we decided. Tinashe forced me to be a little bit flexible and change our season agenda and slot in a show on diaspora remittances.
Well, I'm glad you watched it and that we're here today and that you're here today.
I mean, would you tell us a little bit about the documentary? Beyond the story, but what you learned, some of the interesting insights that came from the research you did.
So thanks for having me here. I did a documentary. It was supposed to be about migration because it was part of a series of 25 films. And I really wanted to hone in on something that I thought would resonate with the Zimbabwean viewers and the greater African continent. And the conversations that kept coming up were about remittances and, people plugging black tax and saying, I have so many responsibilities. And I started to dig deeper into it, and I did not realize at the time that foreign direct investment was less than remittances.
It's a pittance.
It's compared to remittances, it's very little. And I think the messaging around that in the media is more about how important FDI is, and not so much about the importance of the money coming in from our diaspora. So I then started this journey to find out more, and I'm really glad that Chipo is here because she helped me with the research. I am a storyteller, I'm a filmmaker, so I look into the human stories.
Well, we still remember you from Cock on the Beat.
Oh my gosh, that's my niece.
That's Linda.
That was my niece, Linda.
All right.
But I do appreciate if I look like her. She's gorgeous. And yeah, so we started looking at the information that was available to us and did our own surveys and found that people were mostly sending for day-to-day things. And I wanted to bring that kind of information into a human story. So Chipo helped me tie in the facts and the statistics together with the actual human story behind this family. So the film is looking at one Zimbabwean family's story of migration and remittance. But there's millions more stories.
Which was actually phenomenal. I'll tell you the one thing that caught my attention and I thought was brilliant. It's the sister who wants a passport to leave the country.
No, she doesn't want a passport.
Well,
She needs
a passport.
Yeah.
See, you are one of the big brothers who think anyway. They know what's good for you.
Yeah, but I thought that was actually phenomenal because a passport in Zimbabwe, when we grew up, a passport was a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're saying is a passport now is a necessity, like we need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, privilege, I suppose, in quotes, because it is expensive as well, because people are finding other ways to leave the country, crossing the Limpopo or whatever other way they're going to go.
Jumping the border. Yeah.
Right? But all of these people who end up leaving are sending money home in some form. And I think that's a conversation that we need to talk about. I'm glad we're here to talk about it. I'm more looking at it from the level of how it changes us as a country, and then as a result, it starts to change how people look at policy.
Chipo, I don't know if I'm the only one of the three on this side of the bar that's feeling like a bait and switch has just been pulled on us by the ladies. We didn't realize that you guys worked on the project together. Was it part of the plan? Are you there, Chipo?
I thought you knew that we've worked together before. I don't know. I just assumed you just knew it. But yeah, this is my life's work to the extent that my book is going to be on migration and remittances, the impact of exit on political landscapes in different ways. So for the last 10 years, I've been collecting data extensively on the individual level, aggregated data like we did with Ruby, looking at why people and where they're sending, how much they're sending, what the money is being used for in there, and thinking more broadly on what that means for the political landscape, what that means for the country, and only place with remittances. So there's a lot of literature and a lot of debate where in some countries remittances have been absolutely useful for developing the country forward. And then in some places, people feel that remittances are almost like a natural resource curse where you get this money, but it actually inhibits development. But I think Zimbabwe is somewhere in the middle because of the direct impact on people's. So I'm really eager to get the questions from people and where all of us are seeing the impact of remittances in different spheres.
Well, I knew Chipo as an expert in remittances, so that's the reason why she's here.
Yes, I didn't know they'd worked on the project together.
No, I didn't know that.
And Chipo, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of your findings in the work that you did with Rumbi about where the money is coming from, how is it flowing, and where does it end up? And just while you're gathering your thoughts on that, audience members, we will be opening up to questions later in the shows. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put up your hand if you're on Twitter Spaces. Or if you're on YouTube, feel free to type the question in text. Also on Twitter, if you prefer, to type the question in text. And at a later point in the show, we'll bring up those questions. Chipo, what were some of your findings?
Yeah, so the research that I'm going to talk about, the most current, is data that we collected during the pandemic. One of the things that was coming out a lot in the pandemic was the economic impact on migrants living in Western countries. Actually on everybody, right? That everybody was not doing well economically during the start of the pandemic. So in 2021, Rumi and I worked on a really long survey that perhaps some of our listeners would have participated in. We sent out to thousands of Zimbabweans who were generous enough with their time to respond. What the data showed us at the time is that the majority of remittances were coming from the US, but we actually know that fundamentally as Zimbabweans, we know that it's inaccurate. It was a matter of, but I want to give a background data, right, that showed us that a lot of the money was coming out of the US and South Africa and the UK. We know that most of the money does come out of South Africa and the UK, but the US has better response rate for online surveys. So I just wanted to put that out. But when we looked at the thousands of people that responded to us, people were in Norway, Kenya, our favorites are people in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And I want the listeners to hold on to this because the population in Saudi Arabia and UAE has changed the remittances game in ways that we hadn't anticipated before getting the data, even though they are just like 2%, actually they are about, 3% of people in the UAE responded, but the amount of money they were giving is so much, and we can talk about why that is.
And why is it? So, sorry, but why doesn't UAE...
Canada, South Africa, Germany. So let me just walk through who these people are that are sending money. The majority of people that are sending money back home tend to be between the ages of 35 and 40. That's the majority, but the age group that responded ranged anywhere from 18 to 65. And we found that most of these people are in different professions, which is a huge change from when I started collecting data in 2009. Right now, we're finding that the majority of our respondents were the healthcare sectors, In some ways, that's a shift, but perhaps not to be unexpected given what we know is happening on the ground. We also have more people in STEM, in the business field, and surprisingly, a large population of Zimbabweans are still students. And what we thought was also very interesting is that even the unemployed people, so the people that are saying, I'm living abroad, but I haven't worked in a long time, those people we're still sending remittances. On average, about 65% of our respondents are earning at least $2,000 a month. So these are people that are not earning very, very much. And why I was saying the UAE population is interesting because they earn, 10 times more than anybody else. And I think this is the oil factor, so the people that are in the oil industry. But, the majority of people making a decent income above $2,000.
Okay, maybe we'll.
Then I know what's most interesting to people is sending, right? Just on average, we found that the average Zimbabwean is sending about $1,000 a month. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Chipo. I think, I don't know if audience members could pick up everything, but quite a few interesting facts there. She said the top countries are South Africa, the UK, America, and now the UAE.
USA is America.
What did I say? USA twice?
Yeah, you said US and America.
Oh, sorry, I meant UK. Thank you. Are you getting us back for correcting you on Linda versus Ruby?
No, it's got nothing. Nothing to do with that.
I think that
We'll
was
carry that
interesting,
conversation after.
If I could just jump in there, because I think the research is spot on. And it's interesting to me that the average transaction out of the USA is so high, $1,000, she said. You'll find that when you're looking at the SA market, it's much, much lower.
How much are you seeing?
200
Rands or US?
US equivalent.
Oh,
UK even lower, 145.
No, but that's per month, right?
Per transaction.
Yes. I think she talked about a figure per annum.
In total per month. But
Not
even
per month.
The 1,000?
She's talking about per month.
It's an average, so it was like it's across a really large kind of cross-section of people. So it's from as little as $10
yes.
to 2,000 to even 4,000 and 5,000, depending. Some people are sending for infrastructural projects. That's a very small amount of people, but that kind of tips the balance.
Okay.
But
And the
most of them are
frequency,
small, right?
the frequency will change. The majority are spending small amounts. They fall in that low LSM segment where.
Yeah, so if we look at, sorry, I'm just pulling up our scatter plots here. The majority would be sending, around the 200, 250 range. That would be the majority of people. And some, we had people that were just sending $35 a month. And I actually just got data recently from World Remit as recent as 2 weeks ago, because the World Remit is quite interested in what's happening in Zimbabwe. So I was able to look at the World Remit data on how much people are sending. So people would send as little as $35, but those large senders really keep our numbers. And the frequency we found is at least twice a month for people that send regularly.
Could you also speak to, I know we're talking about $200 and $1,000 and so, but from my own Twitter research, I know it doesn't count for much, but there were people who talked about sending $2. And the argument was people from Botswana, the diaspora in Botswana tends to send just $2 across the border. Are you encountering that? The really small amount. Someone is stuck and needs transport money and they need $1 to get home, and somebody in the diaspora.
How do you practically send $2?
Well, you can.
So I think you start seeing a small amount when you come to the value-added services. So people who want to send for specific goods. So don't necessarily want to send the cash, but they can buy $2 airtime, or they can buy a token for electricity. So those value-added services are quite key for those people who just want to help in that specific moment. But I think what an important point that she makes is on the frequency of sending, because the thing with remittances, which is important to note, is that it's person to person. And because of AML regulations, there are limits to the amount of money you can send. Anything above a certain amount, so it varies from country to country. But anything above a certain limit, you then have to go through the banking system. So even where somebody maybe in the UAE has capacity to send 20 times that amount, there's only a certain amount that they'll be able to do as a person-to-person remittance, and then they would have to use other ways to get it in here, which is not.
Okay, so excuse my
but-
ignorance.
But sorry, if we just come on there. Although when you look at the macro numbers, only 12% came through the banks. 88% came through the
Well,
channels.
that's what I wanted to ask around that.
Well, not coming through the banks in the way you're thinking, that it's coming through the banks. So this is also something that I've been studying for quite a bit. Remember, I don't know if you guys remember this, but I was about 13 years old when people started going to the UK in 2000. 34.
You're younger than
During
us.
So if you remember, and I remember that, a number of people in my family were some of the earliest people that I knew to have gone to the UK. It used to be the case that there were these Zimbabweans who had set themselves up, and one of them is now quite a large business owner in Zimbabwe, I won't say who, but they had an office in town where your family member would give them money in the UK through the bank in the UK, but they would deliver the money to families here as cash. And then Western Union became a big player. But then by 2004, which is the year that I came to college, things had changed. 2004, 2005, things had changed. The government said we were no longer bringing in Forex. Western Union had to give people money in Zim dollars, etc., etc. And so then again, people switched to the informal ways to sending. People in South Africa have almost always used informal methods of sending before mukuru.com. And so we keep seeing these ebbs and flows. And then now, more recently in the US in particular, which is a place that I know better, for people that are trying to send monies like $60,000, $80,000 US dollars, as a good researcher, I find myself in different WhatsApp groups so I can collect data. We see that there were Zimbabweans that had a lot of US dollars in the country that needed to send their money outside the country because of, the shifts in currency. And so people are doing those sorts of direct swaps. Hey, who has $20,000 in Zim? I have $20,000 in the US. Can we do a direct swap?
But that's not captured by the formal 1.6 billion, right?
Not captured by the formal system. It's captured by researchers like me. But even then, it's very tricky, right? How you write about those types of transactions, because it's very personal, and we have to be very careful how we frame that so that people don't get.
And I suppose what they're trying to get around is the cost of transacting. So whether you're using banks or you're using remittances, it's about 10%, and if it's a straightforward swap, it will be, costless.
It's just the rate, the exchange rate that you'll be doing.
Are buying houses in South Africa, right? If you're buying a house in South Africa and you're sending $100,000 US dollars to South Africa, there is a system through their banks where people can have foreign bank accounts, etc., etc. So you can just do that, and people are happy to pay the cost for that. In fact, people that send really large amounts of money would prefer it if they could do it through the bank more formally. But the reason is that in Zimbabwe, using the banking system, it's quite complicated. It's complicated in interesting ways. So somebody who has $60,000 to $80,000 in the country, it's difficult for them to remit it abroad. And then it's also difficult to use the banking systems to remit that amount of money. And then the world remits and the Western Unions of this world, they don't allow you to send that much money. So they
Very good point.
So if I could maybe just come in anecdotally here. So, sorry, I know you're dying to talk. We'll let you in. But anecdotally here, because I've spent time in the diaspora, and I'm actually used to be a banker. But I found that when I've been working and living in the diaspora, despite my insider knowledge of the banking system, the friction is too much. It takes too long. You get asked too many questions. The cost is actually lower than using a money transfer agency, doing it through the bank. Because remember, bank charges have a ceiling. So the bigger the amount you're doing, the cheaper it is to go through the bank actually. But
they hit you on the exchange rate.
No, it depends on who you bank with. You can still even do a good deal on the rate.
All right.
Especially if your numbers are big. But there's just too much friction. You fill in too many forms, you get asked so many questions, then it takes 4 or 5 days for the money to appear on the other side. Whereas
And then money laundering issues.
yeah. Whereas there's a guy who you send a WhatsApp and he gives you a local bank account number to put the money in that country, and 30 minutes later your nominee in Zim gets a call and they can pick up the money.
You know, I think the 1.6 billion is actually a very conservative figure.
Where would you put it?
Maybe even double. Because
Right.
if you really think about it,
3.2
there
billion.
are things like that, what Chipo is talking about, and then there are people who are unbanked, who just cannot use any of these systems, the MTOs or the banks. So they'll send through the informal traders, the cross-border traders, organizations through the buses. And they will tell you that they're moving more money than anybody can imagine, just on a daily basis.
On the
Because
buses.
people are going to the buses
As cash.
around the region and it's cash, it's all cash being sent. And so in terms of like transaction fees or filling out forms, there's none of that.
So Ruby, the question I would have for you is, if somebody is sending rands, so the bus driver is bringing in rands into Harare, then what happens? So somebody has to switch from rands into US dollars.
They'll have to switch
Uh-huh.
when they get it.
But that's an added cost.
That's probably an added cost, but they find on that side, they have to fill out a lot of forms to be able to do
Right,
that.
and they
They
just
may
don't
be
want to.
undocumented
Yeah.
as well.
All right.
So
Okay.
there are
Good point.
various issues that
And-
come into that.
And when they switch, they're not switching in a bank. They're switching on the street and they're splitting the spread. The bank spread is being split between two individuals. So you and me want to do a rand deal. And let's say the bank is buying at 17.3 and selling at 17.8. We're going to do a deal at 17.6.
No. The middle. Okay, so the reason why I'm speaking to this is it all sounds extremely cumbersome, and the risk factor is just too much, because somebody can just run away with your money. Then what do you do?
Have you ever done it?
I'm not here to share my anecdotes, but I'm here as an analyst and as a critique, and I'm just saying that everything you're saying about the informal sector, knowing a guy, I wouldn't trust knowing a guy. What if the guy runs away with your cash?
Sometimes
You're
you
talking
have no
about
other
20,
choice.
30...
No, because
I would rather use
Yeah, that's
someone else. I would rather use a surrogate. So I don't have any papers. I would rather use George, who has papers, to send across the money.
No, you're missing the issue of friction, Tinashe. So let's go back to my personal experience living in Mozambique.
Mm-hmm.
In a pretty senior executive role, sending significant amounts of money home every month. If I wanted to do a transfer in the bank, first I had to go and get a tax clearance. Believe it or not, in Mozambique, you need a tax clearance every time you're going to send money out of the country. And so this is half a day away from work.
Why do they need to know that you actually pay your tax?
That's how it works. I've got to spend half a day away from work.
because of market contract, which
Yeah.
is tied to human trafficking, which is also tied to drug trafficking, especially in different parts of the world. So they really do have to check for that.
So I've got to spend half a day getting my tax clearance. And my tax clearance in Mozambique was only valid for 30 days. So next month I've got to do this again. Then I go to the bank, I fill in the forms, they ask all questions, I need documents, I need this, I need that. And then they're opaque about the rate and the charges. So I'm sending $5,000 to the builder. I want the builder to get $5,000. I go to the bank and I say, how many mid cash must I put in the bank? The answer is not clear.
The guy is waffling. What does he charge you? I'm vexed. How can they not be clear?
Yeah.
No, but this is how it works. This is how it works. It's not clear. So I don't know how many made cash I need to give the bank so that my builder gets $5,000. Then the bank tells me it's going to take 2 days. But 3 days later, my builder doesn't have the money and he stopped work.
And
And-
it would appear in the builder's bank account in Zimbabwe.
Yes, because I want to do a proper
Bank to bank.
bank,
Bank to
right?
bank.
So now I've asked the builder to send me his ID, his birth certificate, the contract, everything. I've now gone to my bank in Mozambique. I've shown them everything. I've got my tax clearance.
You're on day 2 now.
Yes, I'm now on day 2, and I've now the bank's now sort of waffled, and I've put a little bit extra to cover for the things I'm not understanding about the bank charges. When will my builder have the money?
Maybe you're just being obtuse about the charges.
No.
More likely.
So now day 3, day 4, day 5, my builder doesn't have the money. he's
if
now
you're
shouting.
sending money-
Yeah.
He stopped working. He's
And now it
shouting.
started raining and
Yeah.
you
Yes.
can't build for another 3
And
days.
then the money suddenly pops up in the builder's account, and it's different from what I was told you'd get
Okay.
because the charges and the rates and everything. But
So you're
there's
willing to
there's-
take
but on the
the
other
risk on a
on the other
guy.
hand, there's a guy called Willard who says, I'll transfer the money in 30 minutes. This is the rate. So I say, Blaz.
What if you run away with my money?
Yeah, what do you run away with my money? No, come on. But you know what? If this works, it's a good deal. Okay, Willard, I'm not going to give you $5,000. Here's $50. Eat at home. Does the $50. And it's frictionless. Happens in 30 minutes, happens at the rate he said, there's no hidden charges. So next month, I do $500 with Willard. Third month, I'm happy giving Willard $5,000.
You know what you just, that's how Ponzi schemes work. You know, the big worry is the smaller, right? It's always good to transfer the small amounts, but there's just that one big transaction. When you sold your house, you need to transfer 200,000 and that guy, Willard, will just run away. Then what?
Okay, that's a great question. When you mentioned costs, the one thing I've been curious about this whole thing is the cost aspect of it, because when the first wire transfer was done in the 1970s, it literally involved a telegraph line and a bunch of operators punching in codes and that sort of thing, and you could kind of wrap your brain around why it cost $25 for wire transfer, right? But today, sending money across the world
The SWIFT
is
is still
like,
exactly the same.
It's like sending a WhatsApp message, right? And a WhatsApp message is highly encrypted and it's free. So I've always been vexed, and I've always wanted to understand why in 2023 people are still complaining about the costs of moving money around when there are technologies that can move money around seamlessly, frictionlessly, at almost zero cost. So why is it that, and one of the things that came out from Tinashe's unscientific survey about what bothered people the most about moving money across borders, cost was the number one item. So why is it that it's still a pain point when we have all this cool technology that allows us to highly encrypt and send messages around the world?
Good question.
The technology is not free. Why do you think the technology is free?
Willard does it on a WhatsApp.
But the technology to send the money. So I think when you look at the cost breakdown of the tech that you're using to send a remittance, there's the remittance platform that you have. There's still the supporting banking infrastructure that you have in the bank end. Even the cost of the SMS. So you're going to get a confirmation SMS. The recipient is going to get a confirmation SMS. So all of that adds up. It's still for sure cheaper than sending through a bank, but we don't have the technology currently where it can be done at zero cost.
Can I tell you a little story? Once upon a time, there was a famous company in this country that repaired Mercedes Benzes, and they had a fantastic story about why you had to pay them a lot of money to repair your Merc. Today, there's 40 or 50 places in this city alone where you can get your Merc repaired at a fraction of the cost. Because, I mean, yes, I hear you, and I used to be a banker myself. There's good reasons why you have this tech and you have all these things, but at the end of the day, the customer is not buying your tech. He's buying a service. He wants the money moved from one country to the other. And Willard will do it on WhatsApp.
And what's speaking to his point, and I would like you guys to respond to this, including Chipo, is in China and India, it's now less than 1%.
It's free.
So Willard
To
is not.
send
Willard
money.
is not. I just want to speak about Willard because Willard is very important.
He's a bad example. He
He's-
could get
he's-
hit by a
he's an
bus.
He's an extremely important person in your story. Willard does not pay tax, okay, to the government. So everything that comes to him, it's his cost. He's not also doing any KYC, which means if he wants to send for human trafficking or for whatever, there's no visibility of the customer, there's no visibility of the receipt as well. So there's a lot of things that Willard is not doing that in a normal situation you may not see the risk.
I feel bad for people with the name Willard.
Yeah. So Willard is good for where there's no other option. And I certainly agree that there are people who are unbanked, maybe they've just landed, they don't know what's going on, they need to send money suddenly, they just don't have the time and they don't know about the other resources that are available. But if you're really going to compare like for like and say, okay, I also want the convenience. So for example, Willard will tell you pick it up at corner X and Y in Harare, and that's what you're going to do. So wherever his recipient is coming from, still has to catch 3 or 4 combis to get there, maybe overnight because, look for change, etc. Whereas if you're using an established remittance or an MTO, like Access Forex, which has got 250 payout points, you're collecting at home pretty much. So I think Willard is not a good example of how you can do this.
I think it's more about the familiar. It's
Sorry.
okay. Please go ahead.
A lot of professionals in the room, and can I just share from the perspective of people on the ground? So I think we've been very reductionist of what Willard looks like. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the earliest people to do the person-to-person transfer systems in Zimbabwe. Now, the companies that we owe you when people die. So in most cases, the informalized sending is really quite formalized, and there are processes in place to hold people accountable. It's not to say that there's never been a case where people have lost their money. Etc.,
Could you give an example,
but
Chibo?
there are procedures of what?
Of how you can hold Willard, accountable. If, for example,
so in the UK, the people that my family used to send money, they had an office in London, and you would go, and in most cases there was an immediate transfer. So while they're standing in the office, you get message in Harare to whomever, right, is going to pay school fees for me, let's just say, that look, the money is now ready in the office. Actually, before the person went to the office to deliver the pounds in London, they would tell their family members, I'm going to Mr. X's office in London. Can you go to Mr. X's office in Harare to pick up the money? So the person arrives in Mr. X's office to give them the money. Their receiver arrives in Mr. X's office in Harare or wherever they are to pick up the money. I hope that makes sense. And so it's almost immediate. And then the word of mouth is really, really important, right? Because for Mr. X, it was really important for them to have access to Forex for their business in a place where access to Forex isn't always as liquid. And people were paying a very, very small fee to Mr. X to do this. And so now Mr. X needs a constant flow of Forex in a place where at the time, and even now I think in Zim, Forex isn't always as easily accessible. That's where that accountability comes in for businesses. That's the way to think about it. The act interviewed were paying tuition abroad for their children. So if you were lucky and you could do the one-to-one transfer through the banks, great. They couldn't do the one-to-one transfer through the bank, so they need to pay $30,000 for their kid who's in the UK or who's in Canada or who's in the US. So the person who's here makes the payment, right? And at the same time, they also make the US dollar delivery for the family back home. So, and I mean, this is not just unique to Zimbabwe, it's unique to most places where the banking system is in crisis. So that's the really important thing to keep in mind, is that when the banking system is not in crisis, you don't need Willard, you don't need Mr. X, you really don't need any of this. But the moment that the banking system is in crisis, so I'm thinking Zimbabwe, I'm thinking, there've been interviews with people in Somalia, in Somaliland, where the banking system really is in crisis, and you're not sure how stable things are going to be. And then for their part, World Remit, I've been asking them, why does it cost so much money to send to Zimbabwe? Let me give you an example. The data we have, where somebody who sent $100 to Kenya, they paid $3. Somebody sends $100 to Zimbabwe, any amount less than $100 to Zimbabwe, you are really looking at a transfer fee of $8. And from the World Remit perspective as well, is that there is a risk with doing business in a banking system that is in crisis, where there can be pronouncement at any given moment that X has changed. And so that risk factor for Zim is truly what makes sending money, one, very expensive through formal channels, but also two, difficult through formal channels for Zimbabweans that want to make large transactions.
Thank you, Chipo. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And let's talk a little bit about, so where does this money end up? What are the recipients of this money using it for? And maybe that's...
To buy some of what we're drinking sometimes. What are you guys drinking?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Rufaro, for reminding us. What are you guys drinking?
That looks quite colorful from where I'm sitting.
This is an Oriental hibiscus tea.
Mutombo.
Mutombo. That's the
Okay,
brand
I
name.
won't be rude
But
about it.
there's ginger in there, there's hibiscus, there's a hint of lemon as well. It's very good.
And a
Thank you,
special.
Tinashe. That's-
No,
yeah,
it's
courtesy
thanks
of
to
you.
Sekai, actually. There's a special ingredient, and she would never,
Really?
yeah.
I knew I was feeling lightheaded.
She calls it,
Where is it from?
It's local.
it's local. Sekai makes us. It's Mutombo Magic. And she will never tell us what exactly is Mutombo Magic, but apparently it's in there.
Then what are you drinking?
Okay, so Rimbi and I are having a ginger peach, and I think it's...
Ginger peach. What is that? Should not have
Is that a thing?
Yeah, no,
Is it
it's a rooibos tea.
Sounds like a coffee.
It's got hibiscus as well. Cheers.
Is one of you sick?
You don't know what you're missing.
And what are we having?
We are having a sublime whiskey. We're having the Glenmorangie Signet, courtesy of the other George, who's actually much more kind to the show than you are.
He's kind of actually spending time on set.
So shout out to George and
really?
Valsa for. It's
It's a
just
beautiful bottle.
It really is.
yeah. So apparently it was inspired by the aroma and richness of coffee, and that's that's
really?
the design of the bottle.
I love
And they claim that the flavor is
Chocolatey.
intense. It's like
Would you like to
it's
taste
like
some?
an espresso.
Yes, I
Just a
will.
bit.
So
I'll have a shot.
I'm very enamored with the Signet.
It's a
And
beautiful bottle, eh?
It really is. Love the design.
It's it reminds me of something
Thank
else. I won't say what.
okay.
There's ladies present.
Thank you.
Would-
Ruby?
Ruby, would you like a taste?
No, I'm good.
Are you sure?
Oh, absolutely. But it looks great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful bottle.
Very chocolatey aroma, if you can say that about whiskey.
Chipo, what are you drinking?
Thanks for asking, Ruby. I am drinking Tanganda tea all the way from Zimbabwe.
Well done.
Because they-
Well, it's early in the morning over there, isn't it?
It is, but I could drink, I think, like 20 Tanganda. It's probably not me, but the last time Ruby came to visit, speaking of remittances or occasion kind things going the other way, how many boxes of tea did you bring? 20?
20.
I don't remember.
$20 of, yeah.
Tanganda.
And that's another kind of remittance, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah,
you know,
going the other way.
Yeah.
the other way.
Mazoe.
Yeah.
Is that all you guys drank? Rumbi came to visit you and you guys just had tea?
No, it was for her, okay? Yeah. She had the
It was for me.
Well, I hope later on in the day for you, which will be late in the night for us, you'll be drinking something more interesting than Tanganda.
Probably Amarilla, also from Zimbabwe.
Oh, fantastic. Next time you're in Zim, please drop by our bar and we'll be sure to treat you to something
Much more interesting than tea.
The interesting thing, right, about remittances and the diaspora is thinking always about the relationships to home. And that's why I think the emotional aspect of remittances is so important. I have often asked, I did an interview with a woman in London who was in her 60s at the time, and she had a whole box of her Western Union receipts. And this is something really interesting to pay attention to. Older people will always use World Remit or Western Union. Actually, they will always use Western Union. They're starting to get comfortable with World Remit and the other things where you have to do things over the phone. But most of them prefer to go to the Western Union Center in Slough, in High Wycombe, in New York City, where they give the person, and the transaction is very physical. They need to get their little receipt, their little paper, and they keep them in a box. And I was asking this woman who's kept all these receipts, and we were telling how much money she sent home. And I was asking, why do you keep sending? Your children are now adults. Like, I really wanted to know, why do you keep sending? And, you know, there is a huge emotional attachment to remittances that isn't always captured in the data. And for her, it's that, you know, she can't be where she is and feel okay if she hasn't sent money to her children, to her adult children every month. And so those are the people that send consistently. They send the same amount of money. It might be small, but they send consistently every month. And even when I think for people in the diaspora, it's really people's immediate family have left. They stop sending money, but that's not the case. In fact, when I was doing research in Europe this last summer, we found that the second generation is also sending remittances now. By second generation, I mean either the kids that were born abroad or the kids that were born who came to the diaspora when they were quite young. So those kids are now also sending money back to them.
Wow. Which takes us back to the question I'd asked before Rufaro made us talk about alcohol. What is the money being sent for? What does it end up being used for?
Well, particularly in my case, I saw that a lot of the money was used for emergency things, the immediate things, livelihoods, your school fees, your health, your, you know, anything that had to do with just everyday living. And less than 10% is actually being sent for anything that has to do with infrastructure, really solid development. So that's something I think has been really immediate with especially the Zimbabwean community, because when I spoke to Kenyans, they were sending money home mostly for infrastructure development and to invest in land and so on and so forth.
So it's welfare support in Zimbabwe.
Welfare.
Yes, the majority. And I think it's also interesting when you look at a person's lifespan. So let's assume somebody left for the UK or South Africa when they were early 20s. So initially, for the first 3 or 4 decades, they're sending, yes, to supplement consumption of sort of this on this end of the globe. So buying medication, buying groceries, buying airtime, buying fuel, what have you. But as they grow older, when they get into that 50 to 60 segment, they start thinking, okay, I've been in the diaspora for 4 or 5 decades. Maybe I want to go home now. What do I do when I get home? So they're starting to think about investment, and they're starting to say, okay, maybe I should start building a house. So you see a lot of people like you directing remittances for the purchase of bricks, for the purchase of cement, for the purchase of land, so that they can have projects that they're running, just to have that. We refer to them as nest egg remitters. Mm-hmm. So this is somebody who's thinking ahead, maybe thinking 10 years in advance, saying, okay, at some point, I want to come home, and I'm not going to work a 9 to 5. I'm working 6 shifts as a nurse in the UK. I want to be able to retire. So I'm going to start remitting to self, which you can do. Remitting to self, building my nest egg, creating my investments, so
as
when
a percentage,
I get back home.
How many are those? So of the people
very
that are
low. So she's at less than 10%.
10%?
Yeah, 10 to
Is that
15%.
your experience as well?
It is our experience.
Okay.
We actually, it's as significant enough to warrant removing the friction for that segment.
All right.
So, for example, one of the biggest pain points or the risks when you're sending money from the diaspora is that you need an individual to pick it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a trust element involved. So I have to trust you that if I send money for bricks, you're going to put it towards bricks and not Glenmorangie or anything
Aw,
else.
it's borrowed.
So the trust element when you're now
Just
doing
include
investment,
some for the
Yeah.
Glenmorangie. You won't have a problem.
I'm sure they do, but the pricing will not change, right? But there's so you'll find that if you can channel, if you can somehow remove that risk element, remove that third party risk, it's of benefit.
So
to the
you're now
remitter.
paying directly to
You're-
the supplier.
You're paying directly to the supplier. We're able to do that out of the UK, by the way, now,
Okay.
specifically for the building section, because we're seeing that out of the UK, people who are in the 50 and above age bracket, they are coming home, they want to have investments, they want to have an asset here, and they want to fund it, but it's not always, I mean, we know those stories of people sending money for years and you get home and
There's nothing.
there's a
Okay.
slab of nothing.
Rumbi, I'm just going to take you back, and by order of priority, could you please spell it out for us? Number one in our welfare, when we are remitting for welfare, is it school fees? Is it medical?
I've seen
Is it
different,
what is it? Could
I've
you
seen
just
different items on different surveys. So the
Alright.
survey that we did, we had health emergencies at the top, and this was during COVID, mind you.
okay? All
So
right.
health was at the top and followed by groceries, and school fees was a little lower. But then when the International Organization of Migration did their survey last year, they found that groceries were now at the top. So
Alright.
feeding families followed by school fees,
Okay.
and then the rest
And
after that.
if we're to zero in again, when you say groceries, on average, how much are we spending? How much is someone in the diaspora spending on groceries?
I can't tell you the specific amount off the
Alright.
top of my head,
Okay.
but what
And
money
is it
that's
multiple?
being sent is for
Is it
that.
multiple families or is just one family? Their direct family,
So they're
or is the
sending to
extended
family and friends, extended family. So what I wanted to show in the film was that it is extended family who are beneficiaries of this. So you've got your uncle's children, you've got orphans in your family, somebody's not paid that month, so you're going to help that person as well. So there's quite a lot of people down the line who are benefiting from that remittance.
Okay.
Okay. So I did a bit of desktop research of my own.
So if you would just allow me to
Sure.
Go
I
ahead.
think that I was pulled up the longitudinal data that we have on remittances, and the two biggest reasons why people send money. And until now, and I'm actually seeing a spike in people sending money for healthcare, which had gone down a little bit, but it's coming up. Groceries always big, and then people have like school fees as another thing there. And then in terms of who are the beneficiaries, there's a couple of people that we broke out to look at how many people they were sending to. So you have one person, and they usually, what I thought was interesting is that when men send, so there are gender differences. So when men send, they tend to send to one person, and that one person then responsible for redistributing it to, the different families, immediate family, extended family, whatever.
Trust
But
issues.
then when women
Okay.
sending, on average, women tend to be very specific about categories. So they might send to this person from this side of the family, and then this person from this side of the family, who's then responsible for breaking it down. And what I actually think is really interesting about the senders is that for men, usually they send fine, okay, whatever. Women send, and they do want a follow-up with each of the recipients. So with women, it's easier to sort of trace where their money went, because they do follow up for confirmation from different family members that we're supposed to get money for different reasons, that money has reached their hands. What I also thought was really interesting and is new is that some of the schools are now allowing you to pay directly from the diaspora to the school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a game changer. And that's when I was interviewing family members in Zimbabwe who were receiving, people actually took a lot of offense to that.
Yeah, who's gonna pay for my whiskey? Sorry, just moving on. Chipo and Rumbi, in your research. So okay, I did a little bit of research. I've got an old study here that I looked at that looked at South Africa in particular, South African diaspora in particular, but some 55% at the time, I think about 2006, 2007, of the Zimbabweans living in South Africa were in professional jobs, whether they were in professional services, accountants, etc., or nurses and doctors, or policemen, or something of the sort, that was 55% of them. Another 20% or so were informal traders. So you could also consider them business people, depending on your view of informal traders. So these are people that obviously have capacity to invest. And yet, you've all just told us that they don't. They are sending...
Only 10% do.
Yeah. Only 10% of the money they send goes into investment. The majority of the money they send goes...
Consumption, to supplement
It's
consumption.
welfare. They're looking after relatives back here who are struggling.
Yeah.
Why is that? Did you look at that at all in your research? Why are they not investing? And you told us that Kenyans, for example, do.
Well, I didn't specifically look into that, but I think it's important for us to understand that people are sending, Chipo alluded earlier to a banking system that does not work or an economy that is failing. So if your family back home is not earning enough, that becomes your primary responsibility. And people are leaving for different reasons, aren't they? The composition of the migrant Zimbabwean has changed over the years. You know, we're not just migrating for agriculture and mining or whatever anymore. We've got professionals leaving in search of greener pastures, but those who are left behind, it's another story. So there hasn't been a shift, I think, in terms of what's happening on the ground here in Zimbabwe. Once somebody leaves, to be able to now invest as opposed to keeping the family going.
But surely somebody who's working in South Africa or in Australia as a mine manager, as an accountant, can afford to buy a stand in a high density area and buy 2,000 bricks a month.
Should they? Well, I mean, you guys, there's also something that's happening, right? Remember the age group that leaves, the age group that we're talking about are people that are starting to make a life where they are, where mortgages tend to be more expensive. And we've actually started to see and I think the reason why our remittances remain at a high is because we are always getting in new people to send, but not necessarily keeping the old senders. By that, I mean, when I first came to the US, for example, I was a college kid, first arriving. I would send money, pretty frequently to have the school fees for this one, etc., etc. Fast forward now, I have my own, I pay $3,000 a month. I thinking of a mortgage, that's just me as an example. That is that the amount that I can send as an individual starts to reduce. And even thinking, and people, Zimbabweans are very committed to buying stands, but the groups where I have entered, where people were buying data on buying stands, and I'll pull up that data for you a little later. But people started hearing that things in Croy Hill, they were sending their money, it wasn't happening. The building process itself, the big confused for the diaspora, because you send $1,000 for bricks, but then somebody else gets sick or somebody dies, and so that $1,000 that was supposed to go towards your bricks is now going somewhere else. It doesn't mean that they're not building, it just means that it's going to take a lot longer. There is also data that I collected asking people, have you started business back home? And often they ask, so most of you in this room would have been business owners, but if you ever started a business with somebody who's very broke?
I have. I think we all have.
Yes.
And it hasn't gone well.
Well, I'm surprised that George asked the question in the first instance, because I think the answer is, we know the answer to that question. Why do Kenyans send money to invest in their country and Zimbabweans not so much? Why don't other investors invest in Zimbabwe and yet they send money to invest in Kenya for, as foreign direct investors? I think capital is universal in terms of what it wants from an investment perspective. People are looking for a risk versus return that makes sense to them. And
predictability.
Zimbabwe has so many challenges that just make it difficult to get a return that's commensurate with the risk. So
I would differ slightly, Rivara, and I would differ strongly with a lot of people that talk about diasporans investing directly so that it moves from consumption to investment. I think that it's not necessary. As long as it's consumption, as long as it's diasporan dollar that's coming into Zimbabwe, as long as, and this is what, speaking to Chipo's point, the financial services sector, because that's the role of the financial services sector. If all this money that's under our pillows was actually in the banking system, then the banking system would find the appropriate entrepreneurs and fund them. Not necessarily someone in the diaspora sending directly to, a tuck shop or whatever. In fact, I would discourage that because, you know what, they're oceans away. And it's always a bad idea anyway when you're far removed from the particular business. But I think that the function of a proper financial services is actually to direct capital. To say, you know what, there's all this money, it's a safe environment, and now we're going to direct it to entrepreneurs who actually know what they're doing, who have the experience. But there's other component. Sorry to talk over your job, George. There's a component I just want us to discuss around.
Nobody
is
respects me.
tourism. So diasporan tourism, where actually someone in the diaspora comes to Zimbabwe and they're spending money as a tourist. And there's no way in which we can capture that. But I want to find out from you guys, how significant is it? And how much are diasporans, when they come to Zimbabwe, how much do they spend on our tourism?
Well, how much do they spend in general, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily in
Just
hotels. I mean,
Yeah.
did you guys do any research in that? How often are they coming? How much money do they bring with them when they come?
Yeah.
Me not on tourism. What does Access Forex have that?
No, not in tourism, but I think it's when you look at the average Zimbabwean, just from a cultural perspective, okay, and they were in the diaspora making good money. When they're coming back to Zimbabwe, it's very seldom for holiday in the strictest sense of the word, for the tourism. Okay, they're coming to check on the projects that they're running. They're coming to check on family they haven't seen in a year. So it's a very welfare-oriented visit. So you'll find that it might not impact. It will impact whatever tax benefits they get, or it will impact consumption or increase in consumption within the family or within the household, but not in the tourism sector specifically, I would assume. We haven't done research as Access Forex, and I haven't done it personally. But I think it's the tourists that would possibly contribute to the tourism sector are the foreigners, not the Zimbabweans coming back home, but the foreigners coming into the country. That would be my assumption. I don't know, Doctor, what you've seen in your research.
You can go ahead, Chibo.
I'm just looking at the data. So we asked, what is your main reason for going back home? So first we asked them, how many times have you gone back home? And the range was from 1 to 5. About 36% of people say they have gone home at least once. And then we asked them, what's your main reason for going? And they said holiday. And I was just chuckling because I think people's definition of holiday is like just getting home, being with their family. That's holiday. But what I think would be interesting to track is maybe they don't go and stay at a hotel, but how many of them, when they're there, are taking their families to visit, Lion and Cheetah Park or Victoria Falls. And I know Victoria Falls is a big destination. So I'm wondering how many people are actually then taking their entire family to visit some of those resort areas, which brings in different money than tourists that come in and stay at expensive hotels. But maybe we do see that uptick, maybe, because 52% of them are saying they come holiday. So I'm going to assume that maybe they do something touristy, even if it's small.
So we have quite a large call center, and we do a lot of outbound calls, talking to clients, just finding out where they're at. One of the interesting things that come out when you're speaking to clients around collection points. So you might be thinking, okay, should we maybe put a child center in a collection point, for people who are carrying babies or for pregnant women, or shall we maybe offer refreshments to make it more comfortable?
Not for pregnant
right?
women. They're not children.
So when you ask those questions, interesting enough, you get a really different reaction from people from the UK than you get from South Africa. So a South African remittance, what we found is that they do care. They care about distance to collection point. They care about the remitter's experience in collecting the money. They still have that very close relationship. We found it very different in the European markets. The person will say, listen, I'm working 6 shifts. You sit at home waiting for me to send you money. If you have to wait 6 hours, wait 6 hours. If you have to be rained on, get rained on. Okay, and it's a very important learning for us, because it then means that we have to be very conscious about how we map each journey for each client and each corridor. Say, okay, there's some things which are not important for the remitter, but they're important for the receiver. So the question as to whether they're taking, someone from the UK is taking a receiver to Lion and Cheetah Park or to Victoria Falls, I would think it's highly unlikely. Highly unlikely.
But I think the tourism question, the answer is very similar to
Investment.
to the investment question, because if you actually think about tourism, I'll give you a personal anecdote. I mean, I'm a runner, and I've been to a lot of out of town runs, Vumba, Mfurudzi, Matopos, etc. But I've never traveled to Vic Falls for a run, because and they have a great run that they do there. But every time I've done the numbers, right, the flight to Vic Falls is the same price as the flight to Cape Town or Durban, right? And you know, Vic Falls is a wonderful place. I like it, but nothing against it. But if I'm gonna
So we're
pay
not
the same
competitive
amount,
enough.
we're just not. And if you put yourself in the position of a person living and working in a place like the UK, right, a flight to Rome, right, is cheaper than
Train to Rome.
you know, is cheaper than Harare, Vic Falls. You know, and as amazing as Vic Falls is, doing Rome, Athens, and a bunch of other cities in Europe is much more interesting for the same cost.
Less. I think
So the guy's just not going to holiday here.
No, and I think also changing the dynamics of our relationships as families as well. Because you're talking about what happens when the person has sent money from their European family member and you're told just go get it wherever. We have these shifts in our families where people don't understand what's going on either side of the remitter and the receiver. They assume that there's money growing on trees in Europe, and that here that everything is okay, but people may not know that you're busy looking for water, for electricity, and so on. So there's a lot of friction that's happening even within these dynamics.
And I'd like us to come back to those human elements in a bit. But okay, just before we leave this tourism thing, and this is, I'm having the last word on it. I think. I think we're being too narrow in our view of what diaspora tourism is. Every time these guys come home, they have braais at home. They go out and have beers with friends. They take trips kumusha.
So qualify it then.
So I think, in my view, that's a whole tourism element there is to do with our diaspora.
That's a good point.
That's that we're probably not analyzing correctly.
Sure.
If you ask the person running the rural bottle store or the rural butchery, what happens in December, they say, there are lots of GP cards and sales go up.
Right.
Are you trying to put a butcher in some rural area in the tourism column?
I'm saying the definition of diaspora tourism is perhaps not as narrow as we're looking at it, for all the reasons we've talked about, right? If you're living in South Africa, you can go to Cape Town. If you live in Joburg, you can go to Cape Town. If you just want to go take pictures and eat nice food with your family. But when you come home, we tend to say, when we go to Musha, I think someone here said, they say they're going on holiday, but it's not a holiday, they're just coming to see their relatives. But it is a holiday of sorts. And there is touristic activity of sorts.
You want to call that tourism? Seriously?
Yes, Chibo?
No. The attract what the sun. Like the sun is the biggest pool for tourism. People are going to Jamaica because they want the sun, they also want the sun. So if you're in the US, like right now it's been so cold, like we were literally freezing this week. When I think holiday, I'm thinking the sun. And my husband will be mad. It's good he's not on social media, but the one thing that he does whenever we're in Zim, he comes home, he takes out the big garden chairs at my sister's house, and you will find him just sitting there for hours. He doesn't want anybody to talk to him. He doesn't want anything. He just wants to sit there. The sun is directly hitting him. It takes my sister so much effort to convince him to just like go under the umbrella just a little bit. And then he says to us, you guys, this is a holiday. I'm not working. Nobody's calling me. I've got the sun. And so for Europeans coming to Zimbabwe, if they had families, homes with garden chairs, I'm sure they would take that, but they don't have it. So their only option is to pay for an expensive stay at some hotel. And if you're the diaspora, you don't have to do that, and that's one advantage. And I'm thinking even of friends from Jamaica. When they go to Jamaica, that's all they do. They go home, they sit outside, whether it's on the garden chairs or it's pamatombo, kumusha, you sit, you eat mangoes, you eat majanje. A big tourist draw for the diaspora, I think, is the Dombokama Rocks. I don't know if any of you have gone there, but I spend, I think, 80% of my time there when I'm in Zim. You go there, you bring your little picnic, you just lay it on those rocks.
I have my suspicions about what's inside your picnic box, Chipo.
George, could you indulge me? I just want to go back.
So sorry, before I indulge you, we're about to open up to the audience.
He starts the bullying bit.
I see
Please
this.
go ahead.
No, I just want to say something very quickly.
You always indulge a lady, always.
Yes, we're indulging.
Exactly. No, you're not.
I'd be done by now if you guys were not interested.
I'm glad I'm still on this side.
We're about to open up to audience questions. So once again, if you've got a question and you're on the Twitter space, please put up your hand so Tinashe can see you. Alternatively, please type your question in text, or if you're on YouTube, please do the same.
Great,
Go ahead,
because so I'll open the question because it actually was a question. So one of my favorite parts in the movie is when you have they're sitting in front of a phone and they've done a group call, and everybody's on the group call and they're talking and they're discussing this impending trip. You mentioned
Is that the call that Kiki doesn't show up?
I think they talk a lot with the group chat.
Okay, yeah. There are a lot of
So,
goals, yeah.
you mentioned something very important, which was that there's a disconnect in knowing what's happening on this side of the world or that side of the world. I find that very hard to contemplate with just the information age that we live in. I mean, we know the minute an earthquake happens in Turkey, we know what is the excuse for not knowing the conditions that people in diaspora are living in and the conditions that Zimbabweans are living in. What is one's excuse?
I think we also build this kind of image that once you go, you who are going are saying that you're going and it's going to be great. And once you're there, some people actually build this whole kind of ideal that they are in a better place. And they don't want people to think that they are struggling. So, I mean, I remember being in London on a train going home from college, and there was a woman across telling her whole family that everything is great in London. And then she proceeded to fall asleep because she was exhausted. She'd come from another shift, but at home they're thinking the money's coming because she was busy saying, I'll send you the money. And we create these kind of idyllic kind of situations where we're lying to each other instead of telling the true story of what's happening between us. So when you're at home, you're expecting the money to come because everything's good. When you're that side, people feel a responsibility. Sending remittances is not new. We've always sent money home from as far back as we can remember. We've always sent goods or whatever it is. I think the difference is how we're messaging and how we're formulating our discussions amongst family and not having those hard discussions around what's really happening and the responsibilities and how that's really taking a toll on people's mental health as well.
Yeah. And
Okay, I'm going to move on the discussion because we've got a lot of ground to cover. No, Chipo, I'm moving on. I'm not indulging anyone. Okay. Moving the discussion on.
Chico, pretend you can't hear him. Just talk.
No.
Just keep quiet.
Moving on. So I posted a graph. No.
Now we know who's the bully.
So I posted a graph on Twitter this afternoon, showing that this country has suffered. She's talking over me. this country has suffered net negative migration for basically forever, except for 6 or 7 years in the 80s. People have been leaving this country. Why are people always leaving the country? Is it sustainable? What's the long-term developmental impact on the country?
Chipo, you can go ahead. You can ignore that question. It's quiet.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's hard, right? Let's think about the waves of people that have left the 2000s. I'm thinking of an example in Anichikanda's work, where she writes about a hospital where about 20 nurses left overnight. So they had somebody in the UK, they needed nurses, somebody helped all of the workers, and they woke up and all the nurses had left. I'm thinking about how we bled teachers. So right now, everybody's talking about the low pass rates. We're talking about the high dropout rate of kids. And as somebody who's done migration, I'm thinking about the number of teachers that we've lost over the years. You know, we had excellent educators, and we still do. But the educators that remain, even the educators that are entering the system right now in Zim, they have a bigger gap that's been left there. Our healthcare systems are struggling because we've lost our doctors, we've lost our nurses in particular. We've lost people that knew how to fix roads. We've lost people that we're losing a young generation of people that should be inspired to be the next X in the country, and we're not getting that. So in a healthy situation, we should be sending people, but when kids graduate, so I see them when they graduate on the other end, I see that, and it's really changed since I came to college. Kids from Ghana, kids from South Africa, kids from Kenya, it's a no-brainer for them to go back home. It's a no-brainer. They'll come to my office, and I've taught at different schools, and they say, oh, Professor, I'm moving back home. I have a job secured back home. I have an internship. I really don't want to stay in the US. I want to be with my family. And for kids from Zim, the conversation is very different. It's that, my mentor, Rebecca Manu, she's been trying really, really hard to get recent graduates to come back home. And I'm always saying to her, they can't afford to come back home. These are 19 and 20-year-olds who've been supporting entire families. And so for them, it's how do I get that job on Wall Street? Never mind that they don't care anything about the finance sector, but they're thinking, how do I get that job on Wall Street? And let me tell you something else. I was talking to a number of my students from different schools about inviting their parents to graduation. And one student says to me, Professor, is there a way that I could just send my bank account directly to the embassy and not to the family? And I said, well, your family needs to bring the bank accounts with them to the embassy to show that somebody is supporting their trip. And he said, if I do that, then I'll never go back home. And to hear this 20-year-old was so heartbreaking, because you felt that if a family saw how much he was making here, then they wouldn't want it to come back home, because they would say, stay there where you can keep making money.
I would like to say something directly to George's question. And I think that the reason why we've always had net migration from an economic perspective is that Zimbabwe has always punched way above its weight class as far as education is concerned and the human capital. There's a high demand. So besides the economic problem, there was always a high demand of our skills elsewhere. So if you look at the financial services sector, we had people going to Johannesburg from the 90s. That was always happening, right? And I don't think it's a problem. I think that our education system, and that's why that's one of the things that we agree on, is we need to really support our education system. We've got a name that's out there in the world. People demand our skill sets. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem that we've always had. Zimbabwe is too small for our ambitions. That's how I would put it. That it's just too small.
Is that an optimistic take?
Well,
You think net,
it's just
net
the-
immigration is a good thing for our country?
What we just need to, we need to create more babies. Okay. So,
Okay. I think
Are you doing your part?
Are you sharing your personal ambitions here? Or
No, I'm
you're,
just saying
or you're
that-
making a statement on
I'm
policy?
just saying that the nature, the geographically where we are. So if you look at Kenya, Kenya is the epicenter of East Africa, right? So they would have the same problem if you're in Tanzania. And I've lived, in Tanzania. Everybody's going, or everybody who is somebody leaves Tanzania, right? Similarly with Uganda. And if we are next to South Africa, next to Johannesburg, and if you're on the top of your game, why would you stay in Zimbabwe when you've got a 10 times bigger financial services sector?
Because it's
in,
so I want to push back on what you're saying. It's making
They
sense.
are so big. Why aren't we creating these big economies? So I've been talking about this in my class of citizenship. The average American really doesn't have a passport. They have no desire to leave their country. They're educated. They're smart. So if we are so big, why haven't we created a big economy to keep our people in our country?
I completely agree with Chipo, and I think that over the long term, we're actually going to be worse off for all this immigration, because eventually a lot of the people in the diaspora who are today sending money back home to support friends and family, those people too have aspirations to leave the country and have a better quality of life. And the number of people that will be left behind to benefit from the remittances over time is going to just shrink. And we are going to wake up one day. It's not going to happen overnight, I think. But if the trend that George saw in his graph continues for long enough, the population is going to shrink, and the remittances are going to dry up. So we really need to make our country a desirable place to live and work. It's not a solution to our economic issues to just educate people so that they leave.
Why would you have a problem with that? I mean, there are serious economies whose primary job is to export people.
India. But okay, they had a lot of them to begin with.
That's why I say we just need to have more kids. We just need to have more kids. But I think it's actually, because that's our competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage is, for whatever reason, we've got smarter people.
When you've got migration, it's a sign of serious issues. The places, Zimbabwe has the migration levels of a country at war when we are not in active war, right? We are sending out people at the same rates that Syria is sending out people. Now, there was an economy where Egypt would have a strategy of getting their people out of Egypt to work abroad. But those were during, the 40 years of bad rule. But the difference is that Egypt had a way
Sorry,
of...
how many years of what?
Bad rule.
Carry on. Sorry, Chibo.
Well, I was just saying, when we are sending out so many people as if we are, a country that's actively in war, that is a problem. And we can we talk about remittances, but we don't talk about the other effects of kids who've grown up without their parents. I've been interviewing, in fact, I know somebody who did a sociology research in Zim on the effect on children of their parents having left in the 2000s. So remember, in that whole first decade of the diaspora, people were leaving 2, 3, 5-year-olds with relatives. There is a social impact to leaving your children in that way. One of the things that I'm really committed at is, how do you raise Democrats? How do you raise children that are interested in civic education, in civil society? And we find that the children whose parents left to go abroad and the children who became orphaned from the HIV crisis, they have the same social challenges. This is the true impact of our high levels of migration, is that it's destroyed families, it's destroyed the outcomes of children. Right now we're talking a lot about a whole generation that's caught up in drugs, and most of that has to do with that we just have a really high number of kids who were orphaned, about 2 million children that grew up as orphans. And we also have a really high number of children whose parents felt so guilty about being abroad that they were sending 16, 14-year-olds 200 pounds a month. What's a 14-year-old going to do with 200 pounds? That's a lot of money in the hands of somebody really, really young. So when we think about migration, we also really have to think actively about how has that changed the family unit, how has that changed the dynamics within the family? Because if a 14-year-old has access to 200 pounds and their aunt who's taking care of them is not making that much, how does that change family dynamics? So I think this, I'm not saying people shouldn't leave to go abroad. This is something I've been accused of because my work does show that in countries where people emigrate a lot, democracy is going to struggle, but we're not talking politics. But what I wanted to emphasize is that the social impact of migration is huge, and we're going to be dealing with those issues for a very long time. I think one of you was posting, I'm going to say one of you, but it was some business person who was posting about how they were hiring for a job and they couldn't get CVs that were of a particular quality anymore. And I think that has to do with we're always losing professionals who's supposed to be mentoring those kids.
Okay, thank you, Chipo. We've got somebody online who'd like to ask a question. I believe a few minutes ago we had a lot of people requesting to speak. I don't know what Tinashe did, but they've disappeared. So if you could,
obviously turned them off.
if you previously requested to speak and you were turned off, please request again. I'll keep an eye on him this time. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We'll make sure Tinashe behaves.
I'll try. Chipo, and I hear you from a sociological perspective, the impact of divided families. But, I'm more of an economist than a sociologist. So, I would definitely support more people. It's like what happens in France. You have a lot more people in France who work in the UK, especially young people, because the opportunities are in the UK rather than in Paris. So I think that in a world where we are globalized, I don't necessarily think
And if you
it's a
could be,
problem.
and if you could be any G8 country, you'd pick France.
Well, quite like But anyway, we've got Richard. Richard, you could go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this the time to speak. I'll speak directly to Chipo. I know she's a big fan of sanctions, and but I was surprised that she didn't actually expand on the effects of sanctions and how sanctions affect migration. The one thing that she said was that Zimbabwe is exporting Zimbabwe is exporting immigrants just like a war zone. And I know that if she would have looked at the figures for sanctioned countries, she would have also explained that second to war zones, the countries that produce as many immigrants as war zones are actually sanctioned countries. A very good example is Venezuela. If you look at Venezuela, since the US put sanctions on Venezuela, I think Chipo can also give those figures because she actually stays in the US. The other thing is also to look at the figures of migration that happened soon after sanctions were placed on Zimbabwe. That is in the 2000s. If we look at those figures, I think everyone knows that a lot of people in the 2000s were waiting at Robert Mugabe Airport, just waiting for a ticket to go. And I know that most people went on the basis that they were afraid of being killed by Mugabe. That's what a lot of people say, but statistics outside of the politics will show you that a lot of people went during the 2000s. But to conclude, because I don't want to take much of your time, I would say that most of the migration in Zimbabwe has happened directly as a factor of sanctions.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Chipo, you can go ahead.
Good. I'm going to answer you quickly. First of all, Zimbabwe is known for having the highest education rate. So I would really like you to go back and read my statements on sanctions, because I think we just don't have time for these accusations that are not based in reality. What I have said is that it's not my duty or the duty of anybody else to advocate for people that are on the sanctioned list to be off the sanctioned list. Many of those people have done terrible things. I don't get to speak for them. They get to speak for themselves. I've also said very clearly that sanctions can have a detrimental effect. Please read what I say. But because you raised Venezuela, one of my students who's working with me right now is a refugee from Venezuela, because the government there has made life incredibly difficult for people. So young children, when she came to this country, she was a young child, right? Her family living in the dead of night because bad politics has made bad actors really, really strong in Venezuela. People that go to schools, bomb schools, or hurt kids. So if you want to defend those people, by means, that's your job, not mine. I have no interest. When you interview Zimbabweans who left in the 2000s, why are you leaving? These professionals, doctors, nurses, teachers, we speak to them. Why did you leave? They left because the economy was bleeding money. They left because they were worried about the politics. They left because of the economy. So unless you're willing to go and read and then bring something to me that says, Chipo, here is where you've written X, Y, and I'm sorry, but we don't have time for those kinds of conversations because we have serious issues to deal with. And I'm afraid that your comments are not in line with how serious these issues are. These issues are...
Okay,
Thank
we've got...
you.
And again, I don't want to roll.
Chipo, thanks. I think you've addressed the question.
We've got another question. Lord, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you a question. Last year, Okoshimono hosted a space and invited the then acting ambassador of the United States of America to Zimbabwe. And a question was posed in terms of the impact on sanctions, especially the indirect impacts of the sanctions on the Zimbabwean economy and the people of Zimbabwe. And the ambassador then indicated that it was a serious concern, the impact was immense, and the U.S. Congress was going to look into how it can mitigate, the word he used was mitigate, the indirect impact of sanctions. So when you advocate for sanctions not to be...
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here. I know people have a lot of issues with Chipo and some of her other work. She's not on the show in that capacity this afternoon. She's here as an expert on diaspora and remittances. So if we could please restrict questions and comments to the issue on the table. I'm sure she'd be willing to engage on her other interests and pursuits on different forums. So if you've got a question that's not related to sanctions, we'd be glad to hear it. Thank you. Do we have any other questions, Tinashe?
Not exactly. A lot of them are comments, and I'm sure we'll get into the comments later on. But
yeah, so while you were waiting for the next question, I can push back some more on Tinashe's view on net immigration being a positive.
Oh, can we move on from that? We've got a lot of other issues to talk about.
yeah.
Well, we're waiting for a question.
No,
okay.
no,
So okay. All right. So what do you want to talk about?
Thank you. So related to the net migration, what happens if the trend reverses or if it continues? Can the economy absorb a mass repatriation of our diaspora?
We'll find out with the Z permit expiring in June.
Are they going to come back, or are they just going to get dropped off at Bytebridge and walk back?
Look, I think that's a good problem to have. Like, if we wake up one day and Zimbabweans in the diaspora en masse want to come back and live and work here, I think that's a good problem to have, because it means that the outlook is so positive, it's so attractive, that they're willing to leave their lives there because the opportunity and quality of life here in Zim is so attractive. Right? So it must mean that we've turned a corner and things are looking really good. So I would love to have that problem where everybody in the diaspora, as long as it's because of Zim being much more attractive. If it's because they're being kicked out of everywhere where they're living, then that could be a problem. But if
and I think there's benefit to what you're saying and to what Tinashe is saying, because the system has to work. There's never been a time in history where net migration has gone on forever. It always bounces back at some point. So there needs to be a workable system where people can actually thrive and live a really wholesome life. And there also needs to be babies.
Oh, you doing your part?
I did my part.
Well, we still need more.
Okay, we've got Owen. Owen, you can go ahead.
Okay, I hope you guys can hear me.
yeah,
Yes,
sure,
we
we can
can.
hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask was, there's this perception that foreign money is much more valuable than that money that is being generated internally in Zimbabwe. I've just been in Cape Town for 5 months, but the perception is really different. I've been trying to do stuff since when I was in Zimbabwe, but when people know is foreign, because now when I'm saying I'm based in Cape Town, it's different. Even the response from authorities and stuff. Why is there the perception that because someone is working outside of the country? I think that's one thing we need to address personally. Good money is money. $100 is the $100. Whether it's being generated in Zimbabwe or whether it's being generated in South Africa, it's the same amount. I think that's one thing we need to so in Zimbabwe, we don't have our values are misconstrued. Maybe you could speak to that.
Okay,
I 100% agree with.
Okay.
100% agree with you on $100 is $100. It doesn't matter whether it's under George's pillow or it's coming from a guy based in London or New York or Sydney. And I think and Tinashe always makes this point, which I think is really valid.
Oh, you really think so?
Yeah. Ooh. He talks about the National Mattress Bank, right? There's a whole bunch of capital that's right here in Zimbabwe, in cash, that's unencumbered. That if the confidence was there, it would be invested in project X or Y or Z. But the confidence is not there, and that money is under a pillow, and it's there for a rainy day. So we need to ask ourselves this question: whether we're talking about diaspora remittances, whether we're talking about money under people's pillows, what do we need to do to engender confidence so that all this capital flows into the formal financial services sector and then gets married to entrepreneurs and projects that are good for the country that need capital?
Yeah. Could I say a word? From an economic perspective, the reason why we're focusing on the diaspora earnings is because actually we don't have that much money locally. So yes, we've got 2 billion under our matrices. The formal system has another $1 billion, and that's it in our economy. So in as much as we would love to have all these investments and projects, unfortunately we're limited to $3 billion that's circulating in our economy. And the diaspora, what they've done, it's an umbilical cord to capital, that's unlimited capital that's out there in the world. So certainly, if we go with Ruby's numbers, $3.2 billion that our diaspora is generating is certainly coming into Zimbabwe. Is sending. Yeah. So this is suddenly coming into Zimbabwe, right? And this is money that ordinarily shouldn't be there. If all those Zimbabweans were here with the current situation, then that money would be restricted. We wouldn't have that money. So the reason why we are talking about the diaspora is because actually I think personally it's an easier way of tapping into world capital. And it's always a good thing when you can tap into the world capital. It's just that in our situation, it happens to be the diasporans. So Zimbabweans who've moved into the international world. And if you indulge me, George, maybe we can then move.
You're actually
the
asking for
conversation.
permission?
No, I'm not. I'm just being nice. But I'm just saying, let's move the conversation. But I would like us to move the conversation to what sort of policies do we need to have to ensure that we actually have more than 5 billion or 10 billion coming into Zimbabwe? because the diaspora is linked to, the last time was about, I think, 100 trillion investable funds that's out there in the world, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And most of it is actually in America and China and elsewhere in Europe. How do we ensure? So it's very possible for the diaspora, the Zimbabwean diaspora, to actually send about 10 billion US dollars. It's actually very possible. So the question is, how do we do that?
I think you ask a very good question, and I know you've got you are trying to play mind games, and you got your own answer. But to me, it's simple. There's two kinds of diasporans there's two pools of money that you want the diaspora to help us tap into. It's their own personal savings, and it's the money they have influence over. There's a lot of diasporans, Zimbabweans, who are sitting on top of piles of money, or somewhere in the hierarchy that controls piles of money. And some of that money is purely in their discretion. And numbers that will astound you. There's Zimbabweans that work for institutions and have the power to write 9-figure checks in their
for sure,
pretty much sole discretion. How do you make them write that check? As well as how do you make them send some of their personal savings home? And I think you need to do two things that are simple but not so easy for us for whatever reason. With their personal money, we just need to stop chopping and changing. They need to know that if they send their money here, the rules are what they are, and they'll continue to be what they are. So they don't care about indigenization because they're Zimbabwean. They don't care about a lot of these policies. They can work their way around them, but they want to know that if this is the policy, it's going to remain the policy.
Okay.
And then for the
I'm going to stop you. So, Chipo.
Because I thought the diaspora was investing in that, but we never got numbers. So the Victoria Falls stock market, I thought that was something that was really attractive to the diaspora, and I think people were willing to take risks in that. Do any of you have numbers on how many diasporans invested, or if that ever?
I can give you some color because I'm a stockbroker. I interact with funds that invest in markets like Zim, and some of them are actually run by Zimbabweans. And we have this conversation all the time about how much you're willing to invest in Zim and under what circumstances. And they're very honest and clear with me. They say, look, if just the simple action of wiring money into Zimbabwe at a fair rate, there's hoops to jump through and problems and challenges, let alone you can buy this class of asset and these are the terms and conditions from a tax perspective and that sort of thing. And then, it's not actually clear that if you get the return that you're looking for, when you want to ship your money out, you'll actually be able to do so. I mean, if that's not clear, and it's not clear, sadly, at this particular stage in the game, then they're not interested. They'll call regularly, so what do you think about that? What do you think about this? And they're watching the market, they understand it, they think that there are opportunities in a different framework of policy, but as the current framework, it's an absolute no-no. They're not going to wire any money to them.
Rufaro, it's beyond the current framework. It's the consistency. So Chipo, going to the VFX that you speak about, a few months ago, about a year ago, we told any company that's on the VFX can retain 100% of its export dollars.
Incremental export dollars.
Incremental export dollars. A couple of weeks ago, the governor says, no. They can only keep 75%. So you can announce policies until you're blue in the face.
Okay.
But you got to stick with them.
All right. We've got a number of speakers, so I will allow them.
Can they we just go through all of them, all the questions once, and can they please be brief?
So be very brief. We'll start with Tabani. Tabani, you can go ahead. You've got your hand up. Tabani?
Hello.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, so mine wasn't really more of a question. I think the question that I had I probably forgot as I was.
What are you drinking?
What are you drinking, Tabani?
Please, I no longer drink. But I think it's probably an addition, an additional maybe point to support what you guys have been raising. Firstly, I think I'll try to be brief. The first thing is that I'm in international law, and I try to focus more on the investment portfolios. And I engage a lot with diasporans who want to invest back in Zimbabwe. And it is very true that there are so many, too many diasporans that want to invest back in Zimbabwe. And they have the funds, they have everything, the resources and all of that, the expertise. The only problem, I think, it comes back to policy inconsistency. I think the last speaker just raised an issue whereby the governor had said, the companies on the VFX would retain 100% of their imperial USD something, but then it changed to now 75%. So I think that's the fear that everybody has, whereby you don't know what the policy is going to be tomorrow. As much as you can have a clear policy today, tomorrow you can wake up and it's going to be changed completely, and you lose out. So no one wants to get into it to lose, and that's another issue. Then, I think I'll end there so that I do not maybe say
Thanks a lot, Tabani, for that sober intervention. Continue drinking tea. I encourage it very much. Perhaps that's what's helping.
I will try.
Okay, so we can have Kudzanai. You can go ahead.
Hello guys, I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I have a question because some of the things here, I think you've already touched it about most of the diasporas have a credit line loans. A lot of people like to get in the bank, but they have a fear and the risk of cooperative business in Zimbabwe. It's brown envelope. Every door that you have to knock on, you have to get so-called corruption. And some of I've heard most of people saying they have the fear of that to operate business and the policies as well. What are things are done to address those issues so we can have more confidence to invest in Zimbabwe, because we know there's open market there, but we don't have confidence to do so.
Okay, good question, Kudzanai, on corruption, and we'll allow the panelists to discuss that. Next one, we will have I am because we are. Please go ahead. The guy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay, so just a quick one for me. So I'm one of those people who try to invest in Zimbabwe from the diaspora. I went back last year, and then I went back 4 times. Then I remembered last time that that was
I'm sorry, my guy. I'm sorry, my brother. I'm sorry. Hopefully your next investment will work out better.
Yeah, so the thing is, I think we are reiterating the same message in the sense that in Zimbabwe, there's main places that I consider for investing. Is that for me personally, I've got a child here in England, and to be able to be attracted enough to go back full time in Zimbabwe, I need to have that confidence and that consistency, and making sure that the culture also is one of the things that I don't think we speak on enough sometimes, or when we speak about it, we speak about it in a very we're just speaking badly about it, but we're not really create real alternatives to the culture for Zimbabwe. Because one of the things that you find that when I invested in Zim is that Chokomo is not even just the government guys. It's not even just those guys. It's even your own family and then your friends. It's terrible. It's terrible. Because some of the things that I think the diaspora can really give back home is it's not just the capital, it's skill. Just basic customer service skills that can be translatable for
fantastic.
For people who are coming in either as tourists or people who are coming in with no relation to Zimbabwe.
All right, thanks a lot.
Should we just invest should we just invest just because I'm Zimbabwean, or should I really have?
I don't want you to lose money.
Risk assessments.
Okay. All right. Let's allow others to speak. So the next one will be Tapiwa. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I am a veteran Zimbabwean who's been wishing all the time, but as all the other speakers have said, there's the risk element, inconsistencies especially, and the word of mouth and this and that. So I don't know if I can ask the people in Zimbabwe itself, what exactly, why can't they take advantage of the insecurity of the people in the diaspora and actually create sort of a safety net or a safety.
Okay. Thanks.
Whether it's investment or whether it's moving back home, what is the people in Zimbabwe doing to actually create that enabling environment to actually attract the dollars and actually make those dollars be more sort of impactful on our society? I mean,
Tapiwa, I think we get. Sorry, I'm going to be rude. I've got your question. You'd like the panel to comment on why nobody's doing something to help diasporans invest safely in the country.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think we get it.
Okay. So the next one will be, and then before the panelists actually reply, is Save Money Financial
Surprised
Services.
that you're capable of being rude. I thought you're the quintessential diplomat.
Send home. You can go ahead.
Good afternoon, good morning in the United States. My name is Peterson. It's a privilege really to hear the contributions of Dr. Dendere and Rumbi. I'm an academic and I'm also a CEO and founder of a licensed and regulated remittances company based in South Africa. My question is to Dr. Dendere is, what is your view on what the impact will be when the exemption permits expire in South Africa at the end of June? I don't know whether you look at that market closely, given that it affects about 190,000 people out of 1.2 million Zimbabweans who are legal in South Africa. And the remittances that are captured by the figures that you shared earlier is the 1.7 billion, of which about a third of those in South Africa are the ones sent by legal immigrants. So what is your view in terms of what the impact will be?
Thanks for that. So, okay.
So what
before we forget, let's do it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allocate a question to a particular panelist, and we'll give you a minute and a half to address that. So Rumbi, would you like to deal with the question on corruption?
Well, I think it's like...
Sorry, I'm going to give everybody their topic and then you can come in. Tinashe, the question on skills. Do you remember the question?
No, I don't. You're gonna
he was asking whether the investment should just be in money, or whether diasporans shouldn't be investing in
That's
skills.
Tabani, right?
Yeah, Tabani.
Yeah.
Shingi, can you talk about what? Sorry.
The ZEP permits one.
No, he not specifically addressed it, Chipo. So I was hoping you could address
Okay.
the question on what can be done to make investing in Zimbabwe safer for diasporans. Rumbi, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, what was the question on corruption?
Well, okay, I think it was a bit of a whinge
Yeah.
on corruption, really, and how difficult it makes it to invest.
Yeah,
But I think
even family members.
it's become a culture issue.
It really has, I mean, I don't really think I can answer it per se. Hold on, Chico.
We want to ask one
It's
question
more...
because I think that question that's directed to me, you'll probably be better at it, and I can do the safer investment ones.
Swapped already. Done.
Okay.
Okay.
Good stuff. So, I mean, corruption is it's a no-brainer. We all know that there is corruption, and it's not endemic only to Zimbabwe. But at the end of the day, we just need to create that enabling environment. I think the thing that just keeps coming up over and over from everybody is this policy and consistency. And until we get to a place where there's more consistency, we're not going to get the investments coming in. So that's going to lead us to a whole other conversation about what we're going to do with money.
It's not investment, skills. Well, and I guess broader, skills and other things that are not money.
Okay, so I'm going to be unpopular, and I'm going to say something that's...
Ooh, were you popular once upon a time somewhere?
At some point. Well, this is going to make me
anywhere in the
more,
universe.
This is going to make me. This is going to make me even more unpopular. But I don't think that Zimbabwe is short of the skills of the things that we're short of. Skills will not be, the one that I would hammer on. What we lack is capital. We've got the necessary entrepreneurs, and we've got the necessary infrastructure to build on the skill set that we already have. I know that maybe in medicine we might not have specialist skills or engineering, but those are skills sets that if you've got capital, you can buy off the shelf. So I would not go ahead, I would not be, as a policymaker, I would not go out of my way to say, oh, I want to invite skills. I actually want to invite entrepreneurs, guys who have their own capital and think that they could make a bit of change in Zimbabwe. Those are the people that I would target. As far as skills is concerned, I mean, if we started drilling oil tomorrow, we don't have that skill set, but if you've got the capital, you can buy the best. And the best could possibly be, Chinese or Australian or whatever. It actually doesn't matter. What we really need is capital.
Okay, right. Chipo, you want to take the question on creating a safety net for diaspora investors?
Yes, and I think one of the things we should always be thinking about is that if the diaspora is already sending $2 billion, the diaspora is more willing to take risk on him than anybody else. We know this from learning about the Indian diaspora. We know this from learning about the Somali diaspora, the Ethiopian diaspora. So our diaspora would be willing to take the risk on Zim. And I think what the government should do is to look at places, whoever is in the government next, but to really look at engagements between the diaspora, such as we've seen in Ghana, as we've seen in Kenya, where it's not just about the safety, but it's also about the respect for the diaspora, right? So it's one thing to ask the diaspora to say send money, because they will send money. They will send money to their families. They'll send money to support the education system. They'll do that. But what else is the diaspora asking for from the government that the government could then give to the diaspora? And if we look at all these places, one of the things that governments have done in Ghana and in Kenya is to say, look, the diaspora, we want you to be active in all areas of government. And this also means giving you the diaspora vote, even if it is just voting at the presidential level. Somebody mentioned France earlier. France actually has a really active engagement of their diaspora being able to vote from abroad. Sweden as well. So it's not just an African thing. It's another way to build trust and commitment from the diaspora.
Thank you. Shingi, you get the last word.
Okay.
Well, not really, I do.
I'll take my chances. So that my question was the one on the ZDP permits. I think to answer that question, it's best to look back. When COVID started, the year COVID reared its ugly head, the World Bank predicted that remittances would actually decrease by a significant amount. I think they thought we would knock off 30%.
They get so many things wrong, the World Bank.
And they got it extremely wrong.
Why do people take them seriously?
They actually went up. They actually went up. We hit, certainly into Zimbabwe, we hit 1 billion in the COVID year. That's when we hit our first 1 billion. Went from 600 million to 1 billion in the year of COVID. And what that tells us, and what it tells Zimbabweans, is exactly what Chipo said earlier, that Zimbabweans will make a plan. They will always send money no matter what. It's not something they've been doing recently. It's part of our culture. Someone mentioned culture earlier. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities. I'm not going to say what those opportunities are, because the person who asked the question is obviously a competitor. But we're seeing a lot of opportunities.
Well, you know them.
Well, he mentioned, he said,
Yeah,
he
he
declared. So, but we're seeing a lot of opportunities. I think there's opportunities for non cash-based or non-bank-based remittances. You're seeing a lot of the banks closing accounts for Zimbabweans who have ZEP permits. There are a lot of opportunities there. Zimbabweans will continue to send money. What we might see, though, is that there will be an increase in the informal, the willets. A lot of willets will come into play, but there's so much risk associated with that we've discussed already before, and it'll be up to us as service providers to motivate that people to send in the formal way so they mitigate that risk.
I'll add 30 seconds to that, and I think that the South Africans are delusional if they think they can.
They think cancelling a piece of paper, is going to make 192,000 Zimbos come home.
No, it's 190,000.
It's only 190,000 that have this permit.
It's 190,000.
That means the most conservative number of immigrants in South Africa is 400,000. So of the half of them, at least half of them don't even have that paper they'd like to cancel. Okay, we out of time, but Tinashe has insisted that we take 2 speakers, so kindly be very, very brief.
Okay, 3 speakers, so
Please
we'll
say
start.
2.
Okay, we'll start with Bento. You can go ahead.
Okay.
All right, nothing happening there. Kundi, you can go ahead.
All right, yeah. So I just wanted to add on to what we're saying, and I think if we just make things easier for the diaspora to bring money into the country, then we will send more money, not just for school fees and basic necessities that people are using, but for real investments. So in terms of make the banking system easier, make it easier for us to open accounts online. The whole gold coins thing happened, and we don't even know what's really going on. How do we even get those coins? And then if we're opening a business, how many times, most of us get 2 weeks, 6 weeks off, and we come to Zim for 6 weeks, and then we're trying to open a business, and then there's some lady at the front office that's just got some attitude problem.
Poor man. That's a really good point.
Create a system in place to make it easy for us. Okay, these people have 2 weeks there in Zim for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So they
These guys think you want to go to line in Cheetah Park when you're here.
In 2 days, 3 days, and then we can do that. And if I want to buy land and stuff, I don't want to do it through my relatives. I just want to buy my land. There you go.
All right, fantastic, fabulous. Next,
very well said.
Next one, Magada, you can go ahead.
Yes, I live in the UK. My name is Samjo. Just a contribution on. Let me start with one of the family support. When we get diasporans, when we get to supporting families, we have no option. That is a direct inflow from diaspora which we cannot stop. It just has to continue. It's either family or people in school or supporting one way or another. So that's a straight one. The one that has got difficulty, the inflow that involves, let's say the FCAs, the Victoria Stock Exchange and so on. What is the problem there is the policy issues. It keeps flip-flopping up and down. We don't know what it is that can give confidence. Then finally, the other one, I think somebody mentioned the trust between government and diaspora. We definitely need a dialogue there. The diaspora needs to it's a give and take. A suggestion was made there. Give them, just for a start, the presidential vote. Just that's their start. So that's my
Okay, thanks. We'll have Mandaza. You can go ahead.
No, it's 4.
By public demand. Come on, George.
Tinashe.
Well, go ahead, Mandaza.
It will be.
It's got a really bad
And
connection.
actually, it's been reported that it's been sent back for remittance. It's actually including those people who are actually traveling. The lack of trust, people actually usually bring their own cash. And the bulk of the money to do big projects, people actually bring their own cash. And that's the money that is actually not being counted as part of that 2 billion. I think the money will probably double the amount of money that actually diasporans are bringing every time. And currently, I know quite a lot of people that have been coming to Zim in the last few months, and majority are traveling around probably 15 to 20,000, and if they're doing a big project, they're actually doubling the amount of money, in which at the moment we're actually thinking is 2 billion, which is probably could be double
majority of the cash when they're coming into the diaspora.
Thanks.
And definitely we need a proper trust between the government and the diasporans as well as a way to invest more money back into the economy.
All right. Thanks, Mandaza. Great intervention there. James, please go ahead.
Okay, I give up now.
A quick one, gentlemen.
I think
I think we need to investigate more on the so-called increase in diaspora remittances during the time of COVID. I just have a theory that I think it's the same amount of money that has always been coming. But when COVID came, the lines of communications, the means to move the money changed, and we had to formalize. And somewhat it then became culture, because remember we stayed for two years like that. So I think an investigation to see, did it actually increase, or it's only that people actually started formalizing? Thank you.
Okay, fantastic.
So the last question,
that's
I will
it.
comment. I think that's a fantastic analysis, and we had this discussion in one of our episodes where we were saying during COVID.
So you've decided you want to extend the show too.
Look, you're not the moderator. We don't really respect that about you.
Anyway, have you ever read the credits? It actually says moderator under my name. It's been lovely having you along. Ladies, it's been wonderful. Chipo, awesome. We should do this more often.
Plug my film.
Oh, yes. Do you want to...
Yeah, just want to ask people out there, watch my film. It's on migration and remittances. The link is in the ZFN Twitter. Yeah.
We'll retweet it.
So you can retweet it. And let's continue conversations about this. I'm so glad we did this.
Yes, this was awesome. Chipo, would you like to do a quick plug on your book? Since everybody's plugging something, and I'm going to get fired anyway.
Yes, you are going to get fired.
I'm excited. The book will be coming out soon. It's on migration and remittances. And I do want to encourage you guys, when you do this next time, can we get more female speakers? We only got one woman to ask a question.
Oh.
So
who's one woman?
Kunda.
Oh, but then they have no power over
Well, okay, we've got no power over who asks questions.
Okay, last plug before you wrap it up.
Since everyone's plugging something.
www.accessforex.com.
That's not a plug. Yeah, they sponsored. They have the rights.
Sponsored. All the tags, all the download links will be in the credits.
Cheers to Access Finance and Koma Raymond.
Cheers.
This was sublime.
No, we're not.
George and Valsa, thank you so much
Cheers.
for the signal.
Cheers. Yeah, you're the only one who paid for your plug.
Thank you.
I'm not paying anymore. Cheers.
It's been lovely having you guys along. Awesome discussion. Let's continue these conversations in our spaces. As I always say at the end of every show, all that any of us wants is a better Zimbabwe. You really shouldn't take us three too seriously, but the three ladies you should. They do know what they're talking about. Where you have access to policymakers, raise some of these issues so that this becomes part of the policymaking discussion. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good,
be good
at it.